I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker today, Kathy Farrington, who has been the global lead and creator of the BOS program, that's Google's approach to digital building, BOSS, and the manager of Internet of Things TPM team. Kathy has transformed how Google addresses digital buildings. She's been with us before. We've followed her activities along the way, and she's created and executed a leading long-term vision while addressing the realities of today to produce globally scalable solutions. I'm going to let her talk about the Google visions, but these are the visions that they're applying to their own buildings across the world, and with the understanding that if it's good enough for them to solve their problems, then it should be very, very interesting to us. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to the stage Kathy Farrington.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? Thank you very much for having me here today, and really appreciate all the exciting and interesting talks. So what I really wanted to talk to you today was how we've scaled digital buildings globally. And Bob did a great presentation, but one thing I would say in my summary is all of it is been about collaboration and team, and we've worked with some of the people in the room and so many different vendors and people at Google to establish and do this. And I think that's been a key message through all the presentations today, is that nobody can be successful unless we all work together on this. So really the problem space, which I will cover very briefly because I think everyone kind of covers it, but cybersecurity is still a huge problem, and you can't just stick a firewall and a network in front of it. You need to sort of look end to end, look at all layers, make sure the devices themselves are secure, the software is secure, the network's secure, all the aspects are secure, so you understand and protect all your assets. The second problem is scale, and what we've been trying to do is do this everywhere, in all our buildings. That's hundreds of buildings in many different countries. And when you're looking at it at scale, it is much harder than just trying to do it in one individual building or one city or one campus. You've got different regulations, you've got hundreds of different stakeholders, the way they want to operate is different, the culture is different. And so trying to do this at scale is a completely different challenge. And the third really is insights. And again, we've heard this, but there's no point doing anything unless we're actually creating value from it. And that's really the third challenge, is making sure that we achieve that value. So Google's approach to digital buildings is achieved through BOSS, or our Building Operating System program. So it's not a program, some people call it, sorry, it's not a technology, it's everything. It's looking at all of our people, our business processes, our technology processes, and policies and standards, and creating everything we need there. It's looking at who are the people and the teams and the skill sets we need to be able to actually achieve this, creating new teams, creating new, and working together with existing teams. And then it's the technology and the solutions. So what do we actually want to achieve? How do we do this? Where do we collect the data? What exists, what doesn't exist, and what do we need to work on to get there? This is sort of our program timeline, and really I wanted to show this because this is a journey. You don't just turn up and change all your buildings to digital in a day. We've been working on this since 2016. We started off, we did pilots, we created a charter, we sort of worked on it as side projects, we established the business case and got the stakeholders and the buy-in. We then moved into sort of a couple of projects, creating standards, creating processes, agreeing on what the minimum viable products were and how can we scale. We audited our buildings and we created roadmaps. So that was sort of the managed phase. We're now currently in the defined phase where we've got global processes and standards that are being used. We have end-to-end solutions that are there. We've launched a bunch of open source products because we want to work with the community to do this, and I'll go through what those are in a minute. We've rolled it out to 50% of our new construction, so 50% of our new construction buildings are working on this, hoping to get to 100% in the next couple of years, and we've completed our strategy. So what are our business strategies and drivers? And on that one, I'll go through that as well, but we've constantly changed those and adapted year after year. And really what we want to then move into is the value at scale. We've got this installed everywhere. How do we drive business value when you're looking at it from a portfolio and globally? So today I'm kind of focusing on the business technology and the procurement installation phases, but what I really wanted to cover is full life cycle. So you take any device, whether it's AV, whether it's from food systems or HVAC or lighting or whatever the system is, you've got to understand the full life cycle of the device. How can it be introduced? Where is it bought? Is it through maintenance or new construction or retrofits? Who touches that device? Who interacts with it? Who works on it? Who updates it? Who manages it? How does it get removed? When is it obsolete? And understanding that entire life cycle then makes you realize just how many stakeholders you need to engage with and work with and build. So on the business and technology side, so starting with the strategy and the use cases, but working as partners with the IT team to make sure you don't scale globally unless you have a global network or global data and global platforms. So working with IT to make sure you're partners in this, not customers or anything. Understanding the applications, the ontology we've heard a lot about, and creating those new teams and new partnerships within the company and with external companies, because there are so many different stakeholders needed. The procurement and qualification, we put a lot of work into qualification. So what are the right devices? How do we pick those devices? How do we understand that they're secure and they'll meet our functionality needs? So we have some tools around that. How do we deal with owner versus landlord versus tenants? We don't own all our buildings, we're in shared space, we're in fully managed office. How do we deal with all those different circumstances, and how does that change the digital objectives of the building? And one of the things we've done on this is actually around lease clauses and what lease clauses we want when we're in a different type of the different buildings. We also have new project roles. So we had mention of the DBC and MSI, so the different project roles which work on projects as well as within companies. From an operations perspective, I mentioned showing value at scale, but the other side of it is really how do we show vulnerability and incident management? Now we have thousands or tens of thousands of these devices. When was the last time you updated your HVAC system that's in your building? And yet, when was the last time you updated your phone and the apps on your phone? That's really where we need to be if we're really driving IT into this industry. And so understanding and having accountability for who installs that equipment and who is responsible and accountable for that equipment and for updating and keeping it in a secure state. And really the last one is continuous improvement. Everything changes, the use cases, the people, the stakeholders, understanding the technology changes, keeping up with the market, keeping up with your stakeholders, and understanding and continuously changing is so important, especially when you're looking globally. And so feeding back that, and the last one on that really is end of life. So I talked about updates. These devices are going to stop getting updates at some point. So what does that mean? So if you have a security vulnerability and that's not a supported device, should you have it in your building still? And that's really a business decision and something that you should and should build into your strategy. So the first one I was going to cover is develop a global business and technology strategy. So for us, these were the very high level objectives. We worked with hundreds of stakeholders, hundreds of use cases, and we've done this since 2016 probably 4 times, and we're doing it again this year. What are your key pillars that you need to work on? Is that sustainability? And Google's got goals to be carbon-free by 2030. So there's a huge drive around sustainability. Is it around efficiency and how we're using our assets in our buildings and have the right efficiency in our buildings? Is it around users and productivity around the operations team? Is it health and well-being? And this one's probably come out a lot more thanks to the last couple of years and COVID and what's happened. Or is it really about experience and brand and wanting to drive people to your buildings and want them to want to work and stay in your buildings? And for us, it was all of the above, especially when you're looking globally. And then all of this on a foundation of cybersecurity. So as I mentioned, we have hundreds of stakeholders. So we've done this multiple times, but we did interviews and user journeys, understanding the different stakeholders. And this is the people building the building, the people operating the building, and that includes IT and other users, as well as the people using the buildings, understanding what they need, what their drivers are, understanding how they use and interact with technology. So that was sort of one of the first things we needed to understand. And part of what we realized very quickly is that our vision needed to be flexible and adaptable. So what we want to do is have any device work with any application and vice versa. Every time I install a new app on my smartphone, I don't install a new camera, but I do when I do buildings right now. And that's not how we should be doing buildings. And so really we wanted true interoperability where one device is used and can be used by any application, which then allows the flexibility we need to adapt to the future. So everyone talks about the silos. How we've tackled it is really a horizontal approach to buildings. So sort of going top to bottom on the device level, understanding the standards. And this is standards around cybersecurity, standards around data, standards across manufacturers around how we want to update and work and manage those devices, standards about how we get data out of the devices and how they're named and labeled and installed in buildings. So across the board, all the standards around devices. The next layer is connectivity, and this could be gateways, it could be Wi-Fi, it could be networking, but how do we create a connectivity layer at a global scale to be able to enable all of those devices to be able to get out? And then the data lake. We are lucky that we have Google Cloud, and so we were able to sort of put all our data in one place and use it. But we realized as well that not all the tools existed. So we have tools created on top of our cloud, which we use to sort of manage and organize and understand our data. And that really leads to the top layer, which is the user interface. And that's where we are regularly changing and adapting and working closely with third parties so they can plug in and use and understand and be able to adapt to our buildings as we go. So this is the more technical version of that. I'm not going to jump into all of them, although I'm happy to go through them in questions. Just jumping on a few things. So in the secure device layer, one of the open source tools we've worked on is DAQ, so Device Automatic Qualification. And what we realized is that what we wanted out of devices was a higher bar than some of the other companies were asking for. And we wanted a way for manufacturers to be able to test their own devices and for our own labs to be able to test devices in a way that's automated because we just weren't going to scale otherwise. And so that's what DAQ is about. In the managed system layer, we have UDMI. So this is how we want to interact with the devices, so Universal Device Management Interface. So it's based on MQTT JSON, so which we've heard about today, connecting how we connect it to Google Cloud, although we want to make it open and connect to other clouds as well. And it's really about how do we do that building to cloud connection to enable that. Again, also open source. The semantic data layer, so we have our own ontology, digital buildings ontology. We didn't find everything we needed in Brick and Haystack, and so digital building ontology is a bit more restrictive on how the data should be structured and a lot more focus on relationships and understanding how the building is structured. We've also released digital building naming standard with a bunch of other people in the industry, and this is how we label. So we mentioned like AHU-03, but how do you do that globally? Like how do you name country, city, building, and assets? So a lot of these are open source because we realized we can't do this alone. And if we have to re-educate our contractors on every building and our consultants, it's just not going to be successful. So we want to work with everyone to come up with these tools. Within the organization, I mentioned the teams. So we have, as part of the real estate, so this would be both the construction side, the facilities side, the innovation and governance side, our global programs, which is around food and gym and fitness. So that's sort of within real estate, we have all of that. We have cybersecurity team engaged. We have the networking team engaged on what they need. We have IT operations on how they're doing it. We have engineering teams around development. When we don't have something, we work with software engineers to build something. And R&D, who will test and qualify and understand new products. And really what we have to do is work across all these teams to develop our technology direction, our standards, and what the process is to deliver this. And then we enforce it. So we have a governance team who re-audit buildings, who check, who qualify, who understand the devices themselves. I put some example vendor roles here on what we're using on projects. So this is more on the new construction side. But we have an IoT controls SME who's sort of like a client-side expert, trained on our standards, knows how we do things. They're sort of the client side. They work across regions and are the sort of point of contacts to ask questions on individual buildings. We then have digital building consultant when it is considered a smart ready building, which I'll go through in a minute, who will help write the specifications for the MSI, who does the system design, engages with all of the engineers to sort of come up with what they need. We then have the master systems integrator, who is the sort of the GC's governance to make sure everything is delivered to that data. Devices are onboarded correctly, they're meeting cybersecurity, commissioning, and making sure the commissioning actually meets IoT as well as facility standards, and also working with cloud integration. Just at a high level, there's a lot more they do as well on both sides. So very briefly, but that's sort of what we've built around strategy and teams and technology. From a procurement and installation perspective, what we realized very quickly is every building is unique, every situation is unique, but we needed to approach it systematically. So we have sort of initiation phase of our buildings where right at the start, so this is as soon as the lease is getting signed, so even before, we work with our real estate team to classify the building, and then that leads to decisions on which standards you use, which technology you use, how you engage with the landlord or other or with other consultants or others in the building, and which standards you use, how far we can take the building and digital objectives. So just at a high level, it's all about operations, so not about ownership, it's about operations. So model 1 is if we fully operate everything in the building, that would be a model 1 building. Model 2 is when we're shared, so we operate our space, the landlord operates their space, and this is where we work with the landlord on cybersecurity and lease clauses and what data can be shared between the systems. Model 3 is a fully landlord-operated building, so that would be a lot less we can achieve, but there is certain aspects we do want, and that's, again, where we sort of work on a smaller scale of things. And then the last is Model 4, and that's sort of a serviced office, where we have very little ability to actually impact how we want to achieve things. So that's sort of the first decision. The second decision is the technical category. So how far do we want to take this building? And again, we didn't want to group it into too many because it would be too many decisions, but all buildings should be delivered compliant. So this is cybersecurity, this is about functionality, how do we get data out of how do we structure the building and name the building, but it's all individual building. It should be able to be delivered with your standard consultants, and so that's sort of all buildings. We have the option of going up to Smart Ready, depending, and these would be our bigger buildings, our more strategic buildings, buildings where we actually want to drive change. And I call it Smart Ready because what we've found is if we pour too much smart into the construction, we either don't use the application when it's ready, it gets value engineered out, or we don't get exactly what we want at the end because the spec was done 5 years before it's actually built, and technology changes so rapidly. So what we want to do is build the building so we have the devices to standard, the data's coming out in the right structure, it's connected to our data lake, it's ready to be connected into our global platform, but it's not connected till after. So when we take over the building, we connect it in, and then it has access to sort of the wider applications and is onboarded, really. We're not actually delivering any smart buildings during construction right now, with the exception of pilots. We have a bunch of pilots. And that's for the reasons I talked about. So we are doing it for pilots to test and understand if we can add more into it. But in most cases, we're trying to add that functionality after we've taken ownership of the building. The last sort of early decision is around the IoT architecture. And this drives sort of decisions across the supply chain. And when I mention IoT, by the way, I'm not just talking about HVAC, or I'm talking across the board, whether it's food or anything else. So what we try and decide is, are we going to do IoT heavy? So drive as many IP devices as we can, where it makes sense, obviously, and that really allows the manageability, the ability to update frequently and have much more flexibility in your space. Or is it more of an existing building? We've actually inherited quite a bit of systems, so it would be too costly, or we have a short time frame, so we'd go with more of an IoT light architecture. And this is sort of the traditional, very serial, more IoT protocols, much more proprietary, but where we can still drive change. And then the last is IoT hybrid, so somewhere in the middle between those two. So that's really the very high level. I didn't want to dig into too much detail because I thought if people had questions, we could go into them. So I was just going to sort of summarize. Digital buildings is a journey. It's a journey your company needs to go on, and I'd say the more end users that can drive it, the more change we're going to drive in the industry. Because we all have to work together, and having a global strategy enables each building to be able to be delivered. We found delivering to smart ready rather than smart really avoids a lot of the issues during construction, especially with technology being old by the time you open it. We require a diverse level of skill sets and new roles on projects and teams internally and externally. And on this one, I would say this has been probably one of the biggest lessons learned we've had, is that we just can't find these skill sets everywhere. When you're looking in so many different countries and so many different cities, we're really struggling to find enough digital building consultants, MSIs, SMEs, et cetera, to do this and have the right sort of balance between technology, project management, and people skills that are needed to do this. Our technology is being developed from vertical to horizontal on how we do it, and you really need to drive continuous improvement to do this effectively. So what's next for us? Show value at scale. So I mentioned that we've got a lot of pilots that have been successful. We have a lot of the infrastructure built and designed and scaled. Now we want to actually drive that to value at scale. We want to constantly evolve. So that's why we want to go to conferences like hear all the new ideas, know what's happening in the industry, and making sure that we know and can adapt that in. We want to work closely with the market, because if we create a standard, it's just another standard. What we need is everyone to work together and say, if we want true interoperability, we need something that is open source, that everybody can use, and it needs to achieve, a whole bunch of things, which is why we've got a bunch of different open source tools. And we want to move to software defined. So really, what I'd love to be able to do is build a building, and then if we change the zoning of that building, I should be able to draw it on a map, and everything auto-configures and rezones itself, and the lights are in a new zone, and the HVAC's in a new zone, and everything's sort of reconfigured. I can update those devices remotely. I can do it for IT. I can do it for my phone. I can do it on an individual building or use cases or space. Why can't I do it at scale? And that's really where we need to drive and work together to get to. So thank you very much for listening. Hopefully that was helpful. And yeah, we've got time for questions, I think.
We have plenty of time for questions, which is good. Thank you, Kathy. So, in the audience, folks who have questions regarding what Kathy's presented, which is really about scale, isn't it? I mean, it's how we have to move, not just as Google, but as an industry, to scale up to digital buildings. So if you have a question, raise your hand, and the people with the mic will come down to you. Please state your name and company. Kathy, you have a microphone?
Yeah.
You're all set. Okay.
Hi, Kathy. Mike Skurla
Hi.
With Radix organization. You mentioned the UDMI driver, which I'm fairly familiar with. Is that an attempt at creating a new protocol standard that would be pushed into devices as a whole into the manufacturing space? Or is that more of an extrapolation of what just Google is working on to communicate internally? The UDMI, we have things like BACnet and Modbus and all of these protocols which are very well known and standard within the industry. And obviously Google has a lot of swagger in the ability to affect things, but when you're starting to talk about buildings on a global level and building technologies on a global level, is this really an attempt to replace what's there with something completely revolutionarily new?
So yes, is the answer on the first part. So what we want to do is create an interface to devices that can be used across manufacturers, so built into the products themselves, and some manufacturers are and have built them in already, to be able to structure the data in a way that works with MQTT JSON, that we can connect to multiple clouds, and that can be used across systems and applications to sort of collect it. So yeah, the initial structure of the JSON is actually based, especially in the HVAC side, on what you would see in a BACnet packet. So we're not completely changing it. It's more about how do we get that out of buildings in a consistent way. And where we want to take it is that next level of how do we push updates to devices across manufacturers? How do we do this? But these are all things we want feedback on. So it's on GitHub. Please comment, add, do features, because this is, as we said, it's got to be collaborative.
Question here in the front row, and then you're next, sir. Please state your name and company.
Is it working? Oh, yeah. My name is Silvia Llanes from GMP Property Socimi. Thanks, first of all, thank you very much. It has been very inspiring for me. I would like to know your vision about digital twins. And another question is a digital building a smart building? Thank you very much.
Okay.
Katie.
So on digital twins, I would say it depends on your definition of digital twins, because everyone has a different definition. But a lot of the work we're doing around ontology and how we're structuring our data, how we're using that to understand spatial awareness in space, and doing that, I would say, is approaching or is a digital twin. We've also got BIM and BIM models in some of our new spaces, so we are doing that. So yes, we believe in digital twins, but it is around what we want to use it for and why. So we're not using the digital twin itself for operations. It's more about informing other applications at the moment. As far as digital buildings, so the reason we called it digital is because a lot of what we're doing isn't around smart and value and intelligent. That is what we want to do and what we want to achieve and what we can do in sort of pilots. But it's around creating a global infrastructure that's secure. We want to change the way we manage and interact and operate devices. So that's not a goal that's around smart building. It's more around functionality and manageability. So we decided to call it digital because it's more around digital and how IT and even the way AV or phones or other systems have gone as opposed to smart. But yes, smart is part of that as well. It's just a part of it, not the overall picture.
And we have a question over here. Wait, can I have a microphone to this gentleman? Thank you. Please state your name and company.
Thank you. Hi, Kathy.
Hi.
I'm Sohaib Sheikh. I'm a company called Lansec. We are one of the largest real estate investment trusts in the UK. Over the last few years, we have been on our own journey of sort of smart buildings and digital buildings as well. And I was quite glad to see that a lot of the work we have been doing internally matches the industry-leading work that Google is doing. So thank you for this presentation. One of the key challenges that we are facing at the moment, and which we are trying to sort of unravel internally, is the smart enablement of the existing portfolio, the existing building set. We have about 23.5 million square feet in the UK. And just smart enabling that, even if you prioritize buildings, it's quite costly, it takes a lot of time. How is Google handling that with their existing portfolio?
Yeah, good question. So multiple different ways. So the first is around cybersecurity minimum in the existing estate, and so that's a separate program and what we need to achieve there. For the actual smart side and how we smart enable the digital buildings, separate program, and really being driven by the use case. So we have use cases around sustainability. So the first use case is sort of how do we get all the sustainability data out of the buildings. But since we're going in, we're going to install gateways, we're going to install things, what else can we get at the same time? And so our boss upgrade program is around that, like, how do we do that? And a lot of what we achieve will probably be more on a gateway type level than actually changing or replacing a lot of the things, unless there's a cybersecurity risk to it. Then the third really will then be around sort of the future use cases, so understanding better space utilization, understanding user experience and other things. And again, we're trying to avoid adding new equipment into buildings unless it's necessary. So we've been looking at using existing data on how so we can have utilization on meeting rooms and all of this understanding from existing systems in the building. So that's sort of what we are starting with, trying to just go with that method on the existing buildings. But over time, with replacement, we can sort of, every new device fits the new standard and then can get us a little bit closer to where we want to go.
Thank you, Kathy. We have a question in the back.
Hi, Claire Penny from Invocara. I have a question just around your service providers. How are they receiving this and how is that impacting on the SLAs?
Good question. So we're working quite closely with the service providers, but I would say it is a journey particularly because a lot of buildings are operated individually right now. And so trying to move to a global portfolio and global scale, we've been more successful in large campuses than we have been in when you're looking sort of a whole region like EMEA-wide or APAC-wide. And a lot of the other things are, the service providers have their own solutions, their own technology that they want to use. And so we want to make sure we build that flexibility in, but own the data ourselves. So if they want to use their own CAFM system or their own other systems, they can plug it in, get the data from our data lake, but still use their own tools they're used to. But yeah, I would say it's still early days with a lot of that engagement.
Thank you. We have 1 second left. Anything, Kathy, you want to say as a final remark? It's been very informative, and thank you very much. And bringing these years of experience, starting back when Google had to look at the problem and to take it all the way through to development. This is a multiple year, multiple country, multiple discipline. It's a huge task, and it's a benefit to the entire industry when you talk about how to scale up. This is one of the things we have. So thank you very much Kathy, for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just say comment on GitHub, comment on, we want feedback, like what we're doing doesn't work. And I think over that 5-6 years, we've had so much input from the industry already, and that's the only reason we've been able to get as far as we have. So.
Great. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.